June 19th, 1944. 23,000 feet above the Solomon Islands. Marine Captain Tom Blackburn felt the familiar weight of combat settle over him as he scanned the sky through the curved plexiglas of his F4U Corsair cockpit. Below, a formation of 30 B-24 Liberators droned toward Rabaul, their bomb bays heavy with high explosives meant for Japanese installations. Above and ahead, barely visible against the tropical haze, were the silhouettes he'd been expecting. Zeros. At least 15 of them, climbing to intercept. Blackburn's hand moved to the panel beside his throttle. A simple toggle switch, barely larger than his thumb, labelled ADI. Water injection. The forbidden boost that turned his Pratt and Whitney R-2800 into something Japanese pilots couldn't comprehend. He'd been ordered to use it sparingly, no more than 5 minutes at a time, but today's mission required altitude, and altitude required power. He flipped the switch. The engine response was immediate. Manifold pressure climbed from 52 inches of mercury to 60. The Corsair, already clawing for height at 2,800 feet per minute, suddenly surged upward as if kicked from below. 3,200 feet per minute, 3,500. Blackburn watched his altimeter unwind like a broken watch spring, the numbers spinning faster than seemed possible for a 7-ton fighter. 25,000 feet, 28,000, 30,000. The zeros, which moments ago had been above him, were now level, then below. The lead zero pilot must have seen him coming. The Japanese formation broke, scattering into the vertical like startled fish, their pilots pulling into desperate climbs to regain the advantage they'd just lost. But physics doesn't negotiate. The Mitsubishi, a 6M, powered by its 1,000-horsepower Sake engine, could manage 3,090 feet per minute under ideal conditions. Blackburn's water-boosted Corsair was climbing at over 4,000. The mathematics of altitude advantage had just rewritten the rules of Pacific air combat. 4 months earlier. Hartford, Connecticut. February 15th, 1944. Robert Shaw hunched over the test cell datasheet, double-checking numbers that still seemed impossible even after 3 months of validation testing. Shaw was a development engineer at Pratt and Whitney, part of the team working on what the company officially called anti-detonation injection, though everyone on the development floor just called it the water system. The principle was simple enough to make aviation textbooks cringe. Take water, 70% by volume, mix it with 30% methanol alcohol, and inject it directly into the supercharger intake of an aircraft engine running at combat power. The water absorbed heat from the compressed intake charge, cooling it by nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Cooler air was denser air. Denser air meant more oxygen, molecules per cubic inch. More oxygen meant higher manifold pressures without detonation. Higher manifold pressures meant more power. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, every conventional wisdom about aircraft engine design said it should destroy the power plant within minutes. Water caused corrosion. Water disrupted combustion. Water created steam pressures that could fracture cylinder heads. The test data in front of Shaw said otherwise. The R2800-8W had just completed its 200th hour of accelerated durability testing. The engine had sustained 60 inches of manifold pressure, 20% above normal combat ratings, for cumulative periods exceeding 30 hours. Cylinder compression readings remained within specifications. Bearing wear was normal. The impossible mixture was working. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Shaw pulled out the comparison data that had convinced the Bureau of Aeronautics to approve production. Standard R-2800 engine, at 30,000 feet, altitude, 2,000 horsepower, climb rate 2,800 feet per minute. Same engine with water injection engaged, 2,300 horsepower, climb rate 4,200 feet per minute. The performance increase was 50% higher climb rate. In air combat, altitude was life. The fighter with superior climb rate could dictate engagement terms, choosing when to attack and when to disengage. The Japanese Zero had dominated Pacific air combat for the first 18 months of the war precisely because it possessed superior climb performance, compared to American fighters available in 1942 and early 1943. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat climbed at 2,200 feet per minute at best. The Zero managed 3,090. Japanese pilots exploited this advantage ruthlessly, climbing above American formations and attacking from the sun, then escaping vertically when pursued. The F4U Corsair, introduced to combat in February 1943, began closing that gap. Its massive R2800 engine generated 2,000 horsepower at sea level. The aircraft's climb rate of 2,900 feet per minute essentially matched the Zero's. But matching wasn't winning. Combat reports from Marine squadrons in the Solomons during spring 1943 detailed engagements where Zeros still held vertical superiority at altitudes above 25,000 feet. The problem was power degradation at altitude. Internal combustion engines breathe air. As altitude increases, air density decreases. Less dense air contains fewer oxygen molecules. Fewer oxygen molecules means less power. Superchargers solved this problem by compressing intake air before it entered the cylinders. But superchargers had limits. Compress air too much, and it becomes too hot. Hot air is less dense. Worse, excessive heat causes detonation, where fuel ignites spontaneously rather than burning in a controlled manner. Detonation creates shock waves inside cylinders that can destroy pistons and crack cylinder heads within seconds. The solution was to cool the compressed air. Water's heat of vaporization, the energy required to convert liquid water to steam, could absorb enormous amounts of thermal energy. 1 gallon of water, converted to steam, absorbed over 8,000 British thermal units of heat. Injected into the intake stream at the right rate, water could cool compressed air by 100 degrees or more. Cooler intake air meant manifold pressures could be increased without causing detonation. Higher manifold pressures meant more power. Pratt and Whitney's solution was elegant in its simplicity. A 10-gallon tank, constructed from stainless steel, mounted just forward of the cockpit firewall. Stainless steel lines ran from the tank to the supercharger intake, where precision nozzles sprayed the water-methanol mixture into the airstream. A mechanical pump provided flow rate proportional to engine RPM. The pilot's toggle switch controlled an electrically operated valve. Flip it on, injection began. Flip it off, it stopped. 10 gallons provided approximately 5 minutes of continuous injection at full combat power. Field testing began in November 1943 at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley, a combat veteran from Guadalcanal with 8 confirmed kills, was selected as primary test pilot. Flatley's report was characteristically direct. The water injection system transforms the F4U's altitude performance. Climb rate from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, improved by approximately 35%. The system is simple to operate and should prove reliable in fleet service. Request immediate production approval. The Bureau of Aeronautics granted approval on December 21, 1943. The first production F4U 1D model with the R2800-8W engine rolled off Vaught's Stratford, Connecticut assembly line on January 15, 1944. By June, virtually every new Corsair delivered to Pacific Fleet units carried water injection. March 19, 1944. Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, California. Captain Blackburn stood in front of 48 Marine aviators from VMF-17, the Jolly Rogers Squadron, and explained the toggle switch that would change how they fought. Gentlemen, this is not a toy. War emergency power means exactly that. Emergency. Combat. When you need altitude, and you need it now. He pointed to the chart behind him. Without ADI, your Corsair climbs at about 2,900 feet per minute at sea level. With ADI engaged, you'll see 4,200 feet per minute at sea level. That's a 50% improvement. A young second lieutenant raised his hand. Sir, what happens if we run it longer than 5 minutes? Your engine doesn't explode, if that's what you're worried about. We've tested these systems for over 30 minutes continuous, but you only have 10 gallons of mixture, which gives you 5 minutes at full power. The limit is tank capacity, not engine tolerance. Another pilot spoke up. "Sir, what about the Japs? Do they have anything like this?" "Not that we know of. Intelligence hasn't reported any Japanese fighters with performance-boosting systems." Which means, when you flip that switch, you have a climb advantage they can't match. Learn to use it properly, and you control the vertical dimension of every engagement. The squadron deployed to Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides on April 3rd. Their Corsairs were factory-fresh F4U 1D models, their engines fitted with the water injection systems that Pratt and Whitney engineers had spent 3 years developing. Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski, the senior power plant mechanic, listened carefully as Navy technical representatives explained the maintenance procedures. Check the water methanol level before every flight. Clean the injection nozzles every 25 flight hours. The system proved simpler and more reliable than the hydraulic system that folded the Corsair's wings. By mid-April, VMF-17 had completed their workup flights and begun combat operations. The squadron's mission orders were straightforward: provide high-altitude escort for bomber strikes against Japanese installations at Rabaul, maintain combat air patrol, and engage enemy aircraft whenever encountered. The Zeros were waiting. April 23rd, 1944. First combat test. Blackburn led 4 Corsairs, providing top cover for a strike package hitting Japanese airfields near Rabaul. As the strike package approached, radar controllers aboard a nearby destroyer radioed warning. Bandits at Angels 2 to 5, distance 15 miles, closing fast, 25,000 feet. Blackburn's division was at 22,000, beneath the Japanese formation. In traditional tactics, this put them at severe disadvantage. Traditional tactics didn't account for water injection. Switchblade flight, going to burners. Follow me up. Blackburn flipped the ADI toggle. The engine surge was like being kicked from behind. His Corsair, which had been climbing at 2,000 feet per minute, suddenly rocketed upward. 23,000 feet. 24,000. 25,000. His rate of climb indicator pegged at 4,200 feet per minute, the maximum the gauge could display. The Japanese formation, 12 Zeros in 3 divisions of 4, was directly ahead at the same altitude. Then Blackburn's division was above them, looking down from 28,000 feet. The Zero pilots never saw it coming. They'd watched American fighters below them, calculated the intercept geometry, prepared to roll into diving attacks. Instead, 4 Corsairs appeared above them in less than 2 minutes, having climbed 6,000 feet in the time it took the Japanese formation to close the distance. Blackburn selected the nearest Zero and rolled into a diving attack. The Japanese pilot saw him and pulled up hard into a climbing turn, a standard defensive maneuver that should have worked. Against a standard Corsair, it would have worked. But Blackburn still had his water injection engaged. He followed the Zero into the climb, his Corsair climbing at 3,500 feet per minute, while the Zero managed barely 2,800. The geometry was simple and inevitable. Blackburn's gun sight pipper tracked forward onto the Zero's engine cowling. He pressed the trigger. 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns fired in unison. The Zero staggered, trailing smoke and fuel vapor. Then it exploded. Blackburn rolled level at 32,000 feet and scanned for additional targets. The Zero formation had scattered, individual aircraft diving for lower altitudes. His wingmen had each engaged targets. 2 more Zeros were going down, 4 Corsairs, 4 Zeros shot down. No American losses. The engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes. The mission wasn't over. Blackburn glanced at his ADI gauge. He'd used approximately 1/3 of his water methanol supply. He toggled the system off, letting his manifold pressure drop back to normal. The strike package completed its bomb runs and turned east toward base. Blackburn's division maintained top cover. No additional Japanese interceptors appeared. The Zeros had learned something today that would spread through Japanese fighter units across the theater. American Corsairs could climb faster than intelligence estimates suggested, much faster. Combat reports from both sides tell the story of April and May 1944. Marine Corsair squadrons equipped with water injection began achieving combat results that surprised even optimistic American intelligence analysts. VMF-17 recorded 16 confirmed kills against Japanese fighters in April with no losses. VMF-214, the famous Black Sheep Squadron, claimed 23 kills in May. VMF-121 reported 19 confirmed with 1 loss to ground fire. Japanese records from the same period show increasing concern about American fighter capabilities. A translated combat report from the Japanese 11th Air Fleet, dated May 8, 1944, noted, "Enemy Corsair fighters demonstrate superior climb performance at altitudes above 7,000 meters. Our pilots report being overtaken in climbing maneuvers by aircraft that should not possess such capability. Request technical evaluation to determine if enemy has introduced new aircraft type or engine modifications." They had introduced a modification, but not one that Japanese intelligence could easily identify. The water methanol injection system was internal, invisible from external observation. A captured Corsair might reveal the system, but no intact F4U-1D models fell into Japanese hands during this period. American pilots received strict orders to destroy their aircraft if shot down. July 12, 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Air Technical Arsenal, Yokosuka. Commander Minoru Genda stood before a blackboard covered with performance calculations and combat reports. As one of the architects of Japanese naval aviation tactics, Genda had helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack and understood how air superiority shaped naval campaigns. The reports in front of him described something that shouldn't be possible. The American Corsair fighters are demonstrating climb performance that exceeds our intelligence estimates by 30 to 40% at altitudes above 7,000 meters, he said to the assembled pilots and engineers. This represents either a fundamental miscalculation in our original assessments, or the Americans have introduced a significant modification to their power plants. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's leading fighter aces with over 60 confirmed kills, spoke from the back. "Commander, I have personally encountered these improved Corsairs. On June 28th, I attempted to engage a formation of 4 at 8,000 meters. I was above them, holding altitude advantage. I initiated my attack dive, and they climbed to meet me. Not evade, climb toward me. Within 90 seconds, they had altitude parity. Within 2 minutes, they were above me. My Zero was at full combat power." One of the engineers, a civilian contractor from Mitsubishi, raised his hand. "Lieutenant Sakai, did you observe any visible modifications to the aircraft?" "Nothing visible. They appeared identical to earlier Corsairs we've encountered, but the performance was completely different." Genda made notes on the blackboard. "We have similar reports from other units. The pattern is consistent. American Corsairs, operating after approximately March of this year, demonstrate substantially improved climb performance." The Mitsubishi engineer consulted his notes. "Our intelligence on the American Pratt and Whitney engine indicates maximum output of approximately 2,100 horsepower. This should yield a climb rate of approximately 850 meters per minute at 7,000 meters altitude. Instead, pilots are reporting climb rates exceeding 1,200 meters per minute. That represents a 40% improvement." Sakai spoke again. "There is one thing I noticed. When the Corsairs engage in these high-performance climbs, their exhaust appears different. More vapor, almost like steam, mixed with the normal exhaust gases." The Mitsubishi engineer's expression changed. "Steam? That would suggest water injection. The Germans experimented with such systems before the war. Methanol water mixtures injected into the intake to cool the charge and prevent detonation. It would allow higher manifold pressures without engine damage. If the Americans have successfully implemented water injection, they could increase manifold pressure by 15 to 20%. That would yield power increases of 300 to 400 horsepower. Why haven't we developed similar systems?" Genda asked. "We have explored the concept, Commander. The technical challenges are substantial. Water injection requires precise metering, corrosion-resistant materials, and additional weight for storage tanks and plumbing. Given our resource constraints and the need to maximize production of existing designs, we chose not to pursue it. The Americans apparently made a different decision." Genda stared at the blackboard. Can we develop a countermeasure? The Mitsubishi engineer shook his head. Not quickly. The Sakai engine is operating at its maximum sustainable power output. Further increases would require fundamental redesign and extensive testing. We're looking at 18 months minimum, possibly longer. Sakai answered the unspoken question. Commander, technique matters when capabilities are comparable. When the enemy can climb away from any engagement and reset the battle on his terms, technique becomes irrelevant. We can still defeat individual Corsairs through superior maneuverability at lower altitudes. But if they refuse to fight at low altitude and slow speed, which their tactical doctrine increasingly emphasizes, we have no effective counter. Genda's report to Combined Fleet Headquarters was characteristically blunt. The enemy has introduced aircraft performance modifications that provide decisive advantage in vertical combat. Our fighter units can no longer rely on climb performance to dictate engagement terms. Unless countermeasures are developed, we must anticipate continued deterioration of air combat results. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. August 3rd, 1944, above the Palau Islands. Warrant Officer Hiroshi Nishizawa, one of Japan's most accomplished fighter pilots with over 87 confirmed kills, led a division of 4 Zeros scrambling to intercept American carrier aircraft. Radar had provided 15 minutes warning, enough time to climb to 8,000 meters and position above the expected American approach route. The American strike package appeared on schedule, 20 dive bombers escorted by 16 Hellcats and 8 Corsairs. The Corsairs flew high cover at 7,500 meters, below Nishizawa's formation, perfect positioning for a diving attack. Nishizawa rolled into his attack dive, his 3 wingmen following. At 450 knots, his Zero plummeted toward the American formation. The Corsairs saw him coming. All 8 rolled into climbing turns, not diving away but climbing directly toward the attacking Zeros. Nishizawa's tactical instincts screamed warning. Climbing into an attack from above violated basic fighter doctrine. Except the Corsairs climbed at impossible rates. Within 30 seconds, they had negated Nishizawa's altitude advantage. Within 60 seconds, they were level. Within 90 seconds, they had reversed positions, looking down at Zero formations that should have been above them. Nishizawa broke off his attack and pulled into a maximum performance climb. His Zero could manage 3,000 feet per minute under ideal conditions. The Corsairs stayed with him. Their climb rate exceeded his by 1,500 feet per minute, an advantage that accumulated every second. He rolled inverted and split, est, diving away from an engagement he couldn't win. The Corsairs didn't pursue. They'd broken up the Zero attack on the strike package without firing a shot. The American dive bombers continued unmolested to their targets. Nishizawa landed at Koror Airfield 40 minutes later, his Zero undamaged, his ammunition unexpended, and his understanding of air combat fundamentally altered. The Americans had achieved something Japanese engineers said was impossible. They had taken an aircraft already superior in most performance categories and improved it further in the one area where Zeros retained competitive advantage: climb rate. The vertical dimension that Japanese tactics had exploited since the war's beginning now belonged decisively to American pilots. The strategic implications were profound. Air combat doctrine since World War I had emphasized altitude advantage. The fighter above the enemy could dive to attack, using gravity to add speed and energy. But if one side possessed dramatically superior climb rate, altitude advantage became temporary and reversible. The force with better climb performance could spot an enemy above them, enter a maximum rate climb, and achieve altitude parity within 2 or 3 minutes. This was the situation facing Japanese fighter pilots in summer 1944. American Corsairs with water injection could negate any altitude advantage through superior climb, then dictate engagement terms from a position above Japanese formations. Zero pilots could still win individual engagements through superior low-speed maneuverability, but only if American pilots chose to fight at low speed and low altitude. Increasingly, they didn't. American tactical doctrine evolved to exploit the performance advantage. Corsair pilots were briefed to avoid slow-speed turning combat, where Zeros retained superiority. Instead, they used their climb advantage to maintain altitude superiority, attacked in high-speed diving passes, then climbed away before Japanese fighters could respond. The tactic was devastatingly effective. Combat loss ratios shifted dramatically. In May 1944, before water-injected Corsairs became widespread, American fighter units reported approximately 8-to-1 kill ratios against Japanese aircraft. By August, with most Pacific Fleet Corsairs equipped with ADI, the ratio had increased to over 12-to-1 in some units. Robert Shaw received these statistics through official channels and unofficial letters from pilots in the field. One letter from Captain Blackburn stood out. Mr. Shaw, the squadron has now logged over 2,000 flight hours on ADI-equipped Corsairs. System reliability has been exceptional. More importantly, the tactical advantage is decisive. Japanese fighters can no longer dictate engagement terms through altitude advantage. We can climb to meet any threat, and we can disengage from any unfavorable engagement by climbing away. The Zeros still turn better at low speed, but we never fight at low speed anymore. Thank you for giving us an engine that changed how we fight. Shaw pinned the letter next to earlier correspondence on his office bulletin board. Each document represented validation of engineering decisions made months or years earlier. But Shaw understood that technical success, measured in horsepower and climb rates, ultimately translated to human consequences. Every American pilot who returned from combat represented someone's son or husband or brother. Every Japanese pilot shot down represented the same. September through December 1944. Water-injected Corsairs operated across the Pacific Theater. From the Philippines to Iwo Jima to Okinawa to Formosa, wherever American forces operated, F4U Corsairs with ADI provided air superiority. Japanese fighter opposition, while still determined, faced systematic disadvantages they couldn't overcome. The battles over the Philippines in October and November demonstrated the system's reliability under sustained combat operations. Captain Blackburn's squadron flew 3 missions per day during peak operations, each sortie requiring multiple ADI activations. The engines handled the stress without complaint. Mechanics reported that properly maintained ADI systems showed no signs of accelerated wear compared to standard power plants. The corrosion-resistant materials and simple design proved their worth. Individual combat encounters illustrated the tactical advantage. On October 17th, Lieutenant James Murphy found himself jumped by 6 Zeros while returning from a strike mission. Fuel low, ammunition nearly exhausted, he should have been easy prey. Instead, he engaged ADI and climbed. The Zeros followed, but Murphy's Corsair outclimbed them at a rate they couldn't match. Within 3 minutes, he'd gained enough altitude to reverse the situation. He dove on the Zero formation from above, fired his remaining ammunition in a single, long burst that damaged 2 aircraft, then climbed away again before the Japanese pilots could react. He landed at Tacloban airfield with less than 50 gallons of fuel remaining, his ADI tank empty, but alive. Stories like Murphy's circulated through Marine and Navy squadrons, reinforcing tactical doctrine. The water injection system wasn't just a performance enhancement. It was a lifesaver. Pilots who found themselves in desperate situations learned to trust the toggle switch on their instrument panel. Flip it, and the engine delivered power that created options where none existed before. By January 1945, Japanese aviation had been reduced to defensive operations. The few remaining experienced pilots husbanded their aircraft for a final defense of the home islands. Offensive fighter sweeps ceased. Training programs collapsed under fuel shortages and the loss of experienced instructors. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, had become obsolete not because its design was inherently flawed, but because American engineering had leapfrogged its capabilities through systematic improvements like water injection. Japanese engineers understood what had happened. Technical reports from late 1944 acknowledged that American fighters possessed performance advantages in climb rate, dive speed, acceleration, and sustained high-altitude combat. These advantages stemmed from superior power plants, better fuel, more extensive use of performance-enhancing systems, and robust logistics that kept aircraft properly maintained. Japan's industrial capacity, strained by 3 years of total war and increasingly effective American bombing, couldn't respond. The aircraft that might have challenged water-injected Corsairs remained on drawing boards, or existed only as prototypes that never reached combat squadrons. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, in October, saw American carrier aircraft play decisive roles in sinking Japanese capital ships. Corsairs flew hundreds of sorties, providing combat air patrol and striking enemy vessels. The water injection systems demonstrated value in the strike role. Pilots could climb quickly to altitude for attack dives, then engage ADI again to escape anti-aircraft fire and interceptors after bomb release. One pilot, hit by anti-aircraft fire that damaged his oil cooling system, used water injection to maintain power despite rising oil temperatures, climbing to altitude where he could glide toward friendly forces. The boost provided by ADI gave him the performance margin to reach safety before his engine seized. The battle for Okinawa from April through June 1945 cost both sides staggering casualties, but the air battle was decisively one-sided. American fighters achieved such dominance that Japanese aviation ceased to function as an organized force. The few Japanese aircraft that approached Okinawa were intercepted and destroyed long before reaching their targets. Water injection played a crucial role in kamikaze interception missions. Radar controllers would vector Corsairs toward incoming threats, often at altitude disparities that required rapid climbs. Pilots would engage ADI, climb at maximum rate to intercept position, make their attacks, then descend and reset for the next interception. The 10-gallon water methanol capacity proved sufficient for these mission profiles. Pilots learned to husband their ADI usage, saving capacity for confirmed threats rather than burning it on routine patrol climbs. The system's reliability under these demanding conditions impressed everyone. Mechanics at Okinawa serviced Corsairs that had been operating continuously since February. Aircraft that had logged hundreds of hours with water injection engaged dozens or hundreds of times. The engines showed normal wear patterns. The ADI systems required routine maintenance, nozzle cleaning every 25 hours, but no extraordinary interventions. The design had proven itself under the harshest conditions imaginable: salt spray, tropical heat, carrier operations, sustained combat, and continuous high-power usage. Water injection hadn't won the battle alone. Radar, radio communications, numerical superiority, and pilot training all contributed. But ADI provided the performance margin that allowed American pilots to control the vertical dimension of every engagement, ensuring they could intercept threats efficiently and survive combat to fly again. In August 1945, the war ended with Japanese surrender after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The invasion that would have cost hundreds of thousands of casualties never occurred. The Corsairs, equipped with water injection, prepared for that invasion, never fought those final desperate battles. November 1945. Captain Blackburn returned to the United States aboard the escort carrier Windham Bay. His squadron was being decommissioned as the military demobilized. Blackburn had flown 178 combat missions, accumulating over 400 combat flight hours. He had scored 16 confirmed aerial victories, all against Japanese fighters. He had been shot down once by anti-aircraft fire and rescued by a Navy submarine. He had survived the war. Before leaving the Pacific, Blackburn wrote one final letter to Robert Shaw. Mr. Shaw, I'm heading home. The war is over, and I survived, thanks in part to the engine you designed. Over the past year and a half, I've flown hundreds of hours with your water injection system. It never let me down. More importantly, it gave me advantages in combat that saved my life and the lives of my wingmen countless times. Your impossible mixture of water and methanol made possible what everyone said couldn't be done. You gave us an engine that could outclimb anything the Japanese could put against us. That advantage translated directly to survival. Thank you. Shaw received the letter in December and added it to the collection on his bulletin board. Pratt and Whitney was transitioning from wartime production to peacetime operations. Jet engines were the future, but Shaw remained proud of what the team had accomplished. They had taken a theoretical concept that aviation textbooks said was impossible, developed it into a practical system, and deployed it to combat units, where it made a measurable difference in battle outcomes. Years later, historians would analyze the Pacific War's outcome through various lenses: industrial production, naval strategy, intelligence and code breaking, atomic weapons, leadership decisions. All these factors mattered, but the pilots who flew Corsairs with water injection knew a simpler truth. In air combat, the fighter with superior climb performance controls the engagement. The fighter that can climb away from danger survives. Water injection gave American pilots those advantages when they needed them most. The technical specifications tell part of the story, but understanding how water injection actually worked at the molecular level helps explain why this system provided such dramatic performance improvements. When water enters the hot, compressed airstream in the intake manifold, it absorbs thermal energy and vaporizes. The phase change from liquid to gas requires enormous energy. 1 pound of water absorbing enough heat to vaporize consumes approximately 1,000 British thermal units. The R2800's ADI system injected water-methanol mixture at approximately 2 gallons per minute when activated. Water constituted 70% of the mixture by volume, or approximately 14 pounds per minute. Those 14 pounds of water, vaporizing in the intake stream, absorbed over 14,000 British thermal units per minute. This cooling effect reduced intake temperatures by approximately 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Cooler intake air provided two advantages. First, it was denser, containing more oxygen molecules per cubic inch. Second, it resisted detonation better, allowing higher manifold pressures. With water injection engaged, the R2800 could sustain 60 inches of mercury manifold pressure, 15% higher than normal. Power output increased to approximately 2,300 horsepower, a 10% improvement, but the real performance advantage came at altitude. At 25,000 feet, where air density was 60% lower than sea level, the cooling and anti-detonation effects of water injection allowed the engine to maintain much higher power outputs. A standard R2800 at 25,000 feet produced approximately 1,600 horsepower. With water injection, power output exceeded 2,100 horsepower at the same altitude. That 30% power improvement at altitude translated directly to climb performance advantages that pilots exploited in combat. The methanol in the water-methanol mixture served three purposes. First, it lowered the freezing point to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, ensuring the system remained functional at extreme cold. Second, it acted as a corrosion inhibitor, protecting the stainless steel injection lines and nozzles. Third, methanol itself was a fuel. When injected into the intake stream, approximately 30% of the mixture by volume burned during combustion, contributing additional energy to power output. Pratt and Whitney's engineers had spent 3 years optimizing the water-methanol ratio. Pure water provided maximum cooling but froze at altitude and caused corrosion. Pure methanol didn't freeze and didn't corrode, but provided less cooling. The 70-30 mix balanced cooling effectiveness, freeze protection, and corrosion resistance. The injection rate was equally critical. Too little water, and the cooling effect was insufficient. Too much water and combustion became unstable. 2 gallons per minute provided optimal cooling for the R2800 operating at maximum power. Field maintenance of the ADI system was remarkably straightforward. Mechanics like Sergeant Kowalski at Espiritu Santo developed efficient procedures. Before each flight, check the water-methanol tank level. Every 25 flight hours, remove the injection nozzles, soak them in alcohol, blow them clean with compressed air, and reinstall. Every 50 flight hours, inspect the stainless steel injection lines for cracks or corrosion. The maintenance burden was actually lower than the oil cooling system. The performance numbers tell the complete story. R2800 engine, 2,300 horsepower with water injection, 60 inches of mercury manifold pressure, climb rate 4,200 feet per minute at sea level, declining to 3,500 feet per minute at 25,000 feet, compared to the Japanese Zero, 1,130 horsepower, 52 inches manifold pressure, Climb rate 3,090 feet per minute at sea level, declining to 2,200 feet per minute at 25,000 feet. The American advantage was decisive. 35% higher climb rate at sea level, 59% higher climb rate at 25,000 feet. In 2 minutes of climbing from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, a water-injected Corsair gained 3,000 feet while a Zero gained only 1,900 feet. That 1,100-foot altitude advantage translated to tactical dominance. The fighter above controlled when and how to engage. The fighter below could only react. The human story matters more than the numbers. Captain Blackburn survived. Sergeant Kowalski went home to Michigan. Robert Shaw continued his engineering career. Lieutenant Sakai spent the war's final months teaching young Japanese pilots tactics that would keep them alive for one more mission. Commander Genda survived, and later served in Japan's post-war self-defense forces. Warrant Officer Nishizawa was killed in October 1944, shot down by American Hellcats while flying as a passenger in a transport aircraft. Thousands of pilots on both sides never came home. The water injection system couldn't change that fundamental tragedy. War is not made humane by superior technology, but for those who survived because their engine delivered the power they needed when they needed it. The ADI system represented something more than engineering achievement. It represented the difference between coming home and not coming home. Shaw understood this as he looked at the letters pinned to his bulletin board in December 1945. Every letter represented a pilot who lived. The mathematics of survival are simple. Performance advantage in combat increases survival probability. Water injection provided performance advantage. Therefore, water injection increased survival probability. Shaw never knew exactly how many pilots came home because the engine he helped design gave them the power to escape danger or defeat enemies. But he knew the number wasn't zero. The F4U Corsair achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft during the Pacific War. While multiple factors contributed to that success, water injection played a measurable role by providing climb performance advantages that American pilots exploited ruthlessly. The system remained in service through the Korean War, where Corsairs with ADI continued to demonstrate superior performance. Eventually, jet engines made water injection obsolete for military fighters, but for a critical period during World War II, water injection gave American pilots advantages they needed to achieve air superiority. The impossible mixture of 70% water and 30% methanol, injected at 2 gallons per minute into supercharged intake air, produced 4,200 feet per minute, climb rates that defeated Japanese Zeros, climbing at 3,090. The numbers tell the story. The letters from pilots tell the truth. Robert Shaw's water injection system worked. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.